Chapter 5, A Path Full of Grace, 2006. The New Year's celebration was over, and it was around 3 weeks in January when I decided to join Paul over to a friend's house to watch the Super Bowl. I drove my car while I trailed him there. While I was driving, I envisioned how I had hoped to have a good year despite the way things appeared in my life. I met a lovely couple who welcomed me at the door. People were sitting, talking, and walking around with food on their plates. I turned around to observe the atmosphere. I could smell the spices and aroma of cooked food as I gazed at the different desserts. As I observed the couple's mannerism, I felt their southern hospitality. I missed that part of being down south in Alabama. The wife asked me if she could take my coat. Immediately, I felt an urge to share some of my inspirations. I remembered that I had some inventory in the trunk of my car, so I asked Paul if he would accompany me while I get some from the car. I gave a framed poem and some bookmarks away. I felt that it was the least I could do to say thank you for the kind hospitality which made me feel at home. While eating some of the best jambalaya and mingling with the other guests, I learned that the family was a survivor of Hurricane Katrina. I was astonished and enlightened to hear about what had happened to a family that experienced a great loss. I was feeling sad because of my situation, but their situation was far worse than mine. I felt an instant connection as we talked about our belief in God. The Larkins also shared their vision and how God wanted them to start a ministry. I'm a good listener when it comes down to hearing people who talk about their purpose with passion. It ignites how I feel about mine. The feeling seems to resonate within my subconscious, and in some of my quiet times, my heart is drawn to fulfilling my dreams. Mr. Larkin and I got into a pretty good conversation regarding my gift to write for God. Then he asked, what was I doing with Paul? I really did not know how to answer the question, but I replied that God allowed us to cross paths for his purpose. I could tell that he was hoping that I wouldn't say for marriage. He replied, you are more spiritual, and you two are unequally yoked. I replied, yes, it appears that way. We were sitting near the entrance of the kitchen. Although I felt that the conversation was divine, there it was again, the thought of knowing that Paul and I were unequally yoked. I didn't want to explain any details about it because I understood that very clearly. I was not offended by Mr. Larkin's frankness. I remained conscientious and mindful about Paul being in my life because it was a twofold. As I paused to think, my mind drifted into a deep thought. I wondered to myself many times that I was in Paul's life to encourage him to have a relationship with God because of his calling, and he was in mine to assist me in preparing for my destiny. I remember saying a prayer in 2004 asking God to send me the right kind of people to help me fulfill my purpose. Several months later, Paul walked into my life. Oftentimes, I wondered if he was the person that God sanctioned. Aside from what I admired about his charisma, his tongue was sharper than a razor. He was quick-tempered, a womanizer, hyperactive, lacking self-control, and short of patience. These things were apparent after spending an enormous amount of time together. I feared that if I removed him out of my life, I would have to repeat the test. Mr. Larkin cautioned me that there may be an argument going on later between Paul and me. I felt hair rising on the back of my neck. I assumed he thought that way because he could discern that Paul was not happy about our conversation. Lastly, I was wondering how Mrs. Larkin was feeling about my conversation with her husband, as I could tell Paul was probably thinking of something. But he seemed amused by the big screen TV and surround sound. While watching the game, I politely threw away my plate and walked over to Paul to inform him that I was about to leave. He asked me to call him once I made it home. I dreaded the warning by Mr. Larkin because I knew how things could get heated between Paul and me. He was a champion when it came to debating. I thanked the Larkins for their hospitality and said goodbye to everyone. After I made it home that evening, I called Paul, and while we were talking, he mentioned that I seemed to hit it off pretty good with the Larkins. I quickly replied yes, and that I was feeling exhausted and ready for bed. When he sneezed, it distracted his next thought, and that's when I said goodnight. I knew he wasn't ready to hang up, but I was not going to feed into where he was trying to go with the conversation. While lying in bed, I thought about the Super Bowl because I was oblivious as to who won the game that night. I remembered it was Super Bowl 41 between the Chicago Bears and Indianapolis Colts. I would cheer for the Bears and the Packers, but aside from that, I am not a football fan. The following week, I received a letter in the mail explaining that my short term disability was being terminated. During the time, my disability was up for review for long term benefits. I did not panic because this was one of the many challenges I had to face. It was midwinter. I was not mentally prepared to start job hunting. I haven't had to look for work in 5 years, and I was not ready to cross that bridge. I was unsure how to compete and where to start again. Sometimes it's very easy to continue doing something that I'm familiar with. While going through these tests, trials, and storms, I struggled because I feared the worst outcome, but in every way I tried to be sure what the next step was because I wanted to know the answer. I realized that I had nowhere or no one else to turn to about my situation, but through faith I read God's word to find hope and courage. While waiting for an answer from disability, I felt an inclination to visit my grandmother. She had been ill and bedridden for some time. I was skeptical about the visit in many ways. The last time I had visited Detroit was in 2002 when my grandfather passed away. Over the years, I have grown apart from being close to my father's family for many reasons. My life took another direction when I relocated to Illinois as a young woman. Over the years, I would visit to keep in touch, but through each visit, something started to change within me. I no longer depended on my family relationships to live my life. As I shared the thought of visiting my grandmother with Paul, he encouraged the visit. He was excited to meet my family. I was unsure how the visit was going to turn out. We made plans to leave the week after Valentine's Day. Jacob and one of his friends came along with us on the trip. While visiting at my uncle's house one evening, everyone seemed happy to see me. It felt like a small family reunion because of the laughter, food, and picture taking. I introduced Paul to my family as my friend. He seemed comfortable being around my family. While I was sitting on the other side of the living room talking to a cousin, I heard a loud noise and laughter. I stood up to see what the fuss was about, and I looked down to see Paul lying on the floor with his arms stretched open and hands wrapped around one of my aunt's ankle. He was yelling and said, "Please don't leave me. I can't live without you." I was extremely embarrassed and disgusted with his outburst. I could not see what was so funny about a 40-year-old man clowning in such a manner. After that incident, I was on pins and needles. I asked him to tell me what his problem was. His response was vague, and he had no reasonable explanation. I felt that he wanted some special attention because it was obvious that he was envious of mine. There was no way I was going to deal with that kind of immaturity. I remained calm, and my family did not want to make me feel any more embarrassed, so they did not say anything else to me about him during our visit. He did a few more weird things on the trip that cautioned me to seriously evaluate him and to keep a close watch. He had a side to him that he thought was comical, but there was nothing humorous about his corny, sarcastic jokes. As I pondered about some things, I had reached a point that I needed to start pressing my way through the whys more to God. I heard an old saying, if you want to know some things about a person, take a road trip with them. However, this trip was an awakening for me. Whenever the cameras started rolling, Paul did not miss a beat. He was very conscientious about his appearance and the cologne he wore. I would say that he was well versed with having impromptu speeches, and the rest was front page news. He mastered well the art of being in front of the media and camera. There was more work to be done on the inside, but he was good at covering things up on the outside. He was hoping that I would change my mind about marrying him. I knew long ago that I was not going to ruin my sanity, especially what sanity I had left. I asked God to move him out of my life. I was ashamed about certain things that he didn't seem to possess. While talking to Paul one evening over the phone, I confessed that I believed in my heart that he was a thorn, sent into my life to keep me humble and to strengthen me. He got quiet after that, and that's when I could tell that I had hurt his feelings. It was never my intention, but the only time he took the time to listen to anything I had to say was by speaking my mind. I was at the end of my rope about figuring things out and waiting for the test to be over. I gave it to him by letting him know that we were not going to be a couple as long as he was still willing to remain in my life. Throughout, I couldn't stop thinking about the test and the lesson that I needed to learn. I could see how he was exposing me to many people in the business world. I sat and observed how he conducted certain affairs. Aside from being in the spotlight, Paul was devoted to advocating for others to experience better health care through various organizations such as the American Cancer Society and American Heart Association. He was a humanitarian and representative of various organizations in the political arena and healthcare industry. However, he was a jack of all trades and a master of none. There were times when my car needed repairs, and he was a champion at fixing the problem. He did not mind getting his hands dirty. I loved that about him, but he definitely did not want to teach me any business knowledge willingly. His motto was, "Nobody's going to pimp my brain." His mind was on making money and being in the spotlight. We were invited to all kinds of events to meet business people in high places. There were many dinner parties, and it was entirely a different world for me. It was exciting at first, but as time went on, it became tiresome. I was reluctant and wanted to be on my way. One night, I called my cousin Chop to vent about the frustrations I had about Paul. She felt that it was a test of some sort. Her advice was that I should pray and ask God to remove him out of my life. If I removed him before the lesson was learned, I would probably have to repeat it. I felt disgusted and frightened. It was terrifying to hear that, but in my mind, I believed that there was some truth to it. In retrospect, I knew that God had removed many people from my past out of my circle, and there was good that came from it. I could not see the full picture, and that bothered me, but I wanted to hold on to believing that this test was going to work out for my good. Somehow I believed that there was an angel in the midst. Deep down in my heart, I knew that I needed to be discreet about my business because I couldn't explain it. All I knew was that I had to keep walking by faith. As I looked around at my circumstances, things did not look as bad as I thought. There were many people who would have loved to be in my shoes. My list of blessings was long, and from the outside, my life was in order. The war was on the inside of my soul. I struggled to accept that God was working on me. I wanted control of the situation because I wavered in my faith, yet I continued to learn to walk by faith. While checking the mailbox one afternoon, I received a letter from CareMed, the disability office. I was approved for long-term benefits. I was shouting and thanking God for hearing my cry. He whispered, "The just shall live by faith," Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, and Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. I was amazed by it. Then tears poured as I lifted my hands to give God the glory. I sat down to write some inspirations of what my heart was feeling. Many of my writings are from the times when I felt completely captivated by the power of the Holy Spirit. Oftentimes, I would break down and cry after reading some of my inspirations. Through my finite mind, I understood some things, and the one thing that I firmly believed is that God was using my life as an instrument to bring him the praise, honor, and glory. Paul was stressing me out about my situation because I revealed little by little to him. I knew that he didn't understand this thing called walking by faith, but he was concerned about me ending up on the streets. When I first left my job around 7 months ago, My savings was low. Paul offered to help buy me some groceries. While we were in the grocery store, he was assisting me with putting food in the basket. However, he started taking the food that I chose out of the basket, stating that it wouldn't last me long. My heart started pounding. By his reaction, I became angry and asked him, why was he doing that? His logic was to make sure that I had rice, beans, and potatoes, the kind of food that will last longer, and since I was not a diligent cook, I should not buy perishables that would go bad if not cooked right away. I was not used to anyone giving me a handout and certainly not telling me what to buy. The way things were being handled in the matter, I felt as though I had lost my independence, and it was frightening. The experience reminded me to be sensitive when helping others. I have always given, and I have not tried to regulate or concern myself with teaching someone life skills on how they choose to use what I give. It is a gift to give. It should always be about blessing someone. Meanwhile, my finances were stable and things seemed calm in my life. I pondered knowing that God had his loving arms wrapped around me. I focused my attention on believing that great things were going to happen for me. One morning, Paul called to tell me the news that he received his confirmation from God to preach. I remained quiet as he spoke. I felt good about it because I wanted to believe that our time spent together was to enlighten and strengthen each other beyond what we could see physically. I have always told him that he would win many souls to Christ because when he's passionate about something that he believes in, people do listen to him. Having that kind of influence and power is a great gift, but it does come with responsibility. I expressed to him how blessed his life would be in accepting to help others in an intangible way. I felt happy and hopeful to hear the news. I asked him if he was ready, and he replied, yes. Sometimes there's a turning point in a person's life when education, career, money, people, relationships, places, and things cannot fill you. I've learned that only God can give a person that true peace and joy. The things that are intangible require a much greater appreciation. I've had many conversations with Paul about ministry and why it was important to give his life to God. Tomorrow is not promised, and one day it will be too late. The day when Paul gave his trial sermon, the church was pretty full. I listened and prayed for this to be a wonderful beginning for him. Many of his fraternity brothers, family, and friends were there. I invited Jasmine to attend as my guest. Everyone listened intently while Paul was speaking. Everyone seemed to exhibit support and encouragement as they wished him many blessings. As I prepared to attend the annual Women's Conference retreat in Wisconsin, I prayed for God to make a way so that I could have sufficient funds to cover all the expenses for each opportunity that I wanted to participate. I was mindful and conscientious about the budget I was living on and what I could afford to invest in the business. During the time, I received a call from Christine. She was a friend that I met at World USA. I felt by the conversation I had with her that it would be a good time to fellowship together and get some encouragement. I asked her if she would like to attend the retreat with me. We agreed to leave early the Saturday morning of the event on our way to Delavan, Wisconsin. The scenery we took was the countryside roads. It was springtime and nature was in bloom. Soon as we got settled into our room at the resort, I felt delighted this time to attend the retreat as a vendor, although I felt apprehensive regarding how things were going to turn out. I remained optimistic while I focused on the concept of being an entrepreneur. I felt a sense of empowerment and confidence in seeing the manifestation of how God was unfolding the pieces to my dream. There were business name signs on the tables for the vendors. The closer I walked toward the conference area, I noticed mine, Reflections of Grace. My theme was colorful, warm, and inviting. I set up my frames and bookmarks on fixtures. While I was preparing my table, I noticed a few familiar faces. One lady I remembered from a prayer gathering at another place and time, and the others were from the previous years that I had attended. Some people walked right past me. However, I spoke to different people that greeted me. They were moving in a fast pace as they were approaching the conference room. The guest speaker was making the announcements for the weekend's conference. As I looked to my left, there was a lady that stopped at my table to read some of my inspirations. She asked if I had some greeting cards that would be nice for her mother-in-law. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't have that item in print. She was in a hurry to make her way into the conference room. I replied that I didn't have any greeting cards, and then she paused to say, "I hope you sell out." I felt the sincerity in her voice, which placed a smile on my heart while I took another look at the setup of my table. Christine looked at me in amazement. Her almond-shaped eyes and long hair were her main attractive features. There were other vendors selling Christian paintings, art and crafts, pieces of jewelry, trendy designer purses, apparel from some of the best brands. There were many creative, successful, and gifted entrepreneurs. As the vendors sat outside the conference, we became acquainted with one another. The table to my right was the purse table. Christine started to hold a conversation with the young lady at the purse table. She was inquiring about the new hair weave infusion. I was focused on staying close to my table and answering questions if anyone stopped by. During the conference break, different women came out and walked around to view the other products that were on display. Christine and I were having a conversation about other conferences that I should try becoming a vendor at. I listened intently to what she had to say, but somehow she was starting to sound pessimistic. She said that I would not be on Oprah because I had never done an all-white conference. Somehow I felt as though we weren't speaking the same language. I asked her, what was she implying? She held back what she really wanted to say. I replied that I was not prejudiced, and I know that God would not have given me a gift to inspire others if it was true. She countered by abruptly talking a lot of nonsense. She was entitled to her own opinion, but it went too far. We both got heated and upset with the way the conversation was going. She excused herself by going to the ladies' room while I sat there feeling hurt and surprised. I couldn't believe that we were actually arguing like we were. I was appalled. I suddenly remembered what I was there for and regained composure to behave professional. I reflected on the time when I first met Christine and how we formed our friendship. I suppose we bonded because we both had aspirations and dreams, in spite of the primary commonalities that we shared, which were our faith in God and wearing a mask from the abuse we suffered and the struggles that we encountered while looking for true love. We have disagreed on many things before, but we never went back and forth to the point that we were angry toward one another. However, I've always managed to persevere through the ups and downs that I encountered. I was always positive and encouraging toward her when things were going bad in her life and was willing to be a friend that listened as well as offering support. There were many thoughts going through my mind. I thought that she was a supportive and an encouraging friend who had my back, like I had hers. But after experiencing how she acted in public and felt about me, it released negative energy into the universe. I did not sell a single thing. I was given the opportunity to set up another day, but I became discouraged. I packed my inventory and we took it back to the room. I held my head up and kept a smile on my face. We held small conversations throughout the rest of our time there. I was not into making another scene or taking a chance to feel worse. Therefore, I kept a lot of what I was feeling to myself. Later that evening, we got dressed for the highlight of the weekend, the dinner. The food was delicious. I love food too much to have allowed myself to pass on it. I did discover that I did not have much of an appetite. After we made it back to our suite, I had the bedroom and Christine slept on the pull-out sofa bed, and we both had our own bathrooms. I had a wonderful big king-size bed, and the room was beautifully decorated. As soon as I crawled under the sheets, I started praying to God as the tears fell. I wanted to cry out loud, Lord, why is this happening to me? I couldn't understand why and for what reason. I am a kind and humble person, as I realized that only God knew the hurt that I was feeling inside. I drifted off to sleep. While sleeping, I saw a vision of a bowl sitting in a corner on a shiny hardwood floor. It was filled and overflowing with money. After waking the next morning, I suddenly remembered how sad I felt on Saturday. As I was getting prepared to take my shower, I thought about the dream I had regarding the bowl filled with the money. I started thanking God as I was getting dressed. I interpreted that dream as a sign from God, letting me know that my business would not fail. That was all I needed to keep persevering. On the way back home to Illinois, I remained calm and quiet about my feelings concerning the incident on Saturday between Christine and me. She apologized for her behavior. Her reasoning for acting out was because she was under a lot of financial stress. Her bills were piling high, and her car was impound due to not paying tolls, among other family issues. She said that I may not want to ever talk to her again after the trip. I felt that maybe I needed to start evaluating our friendship. Thoughts started rambling through my mind while I was driving. She always looked up to me because of my strength and how I exhibited being independent. I made things look easy, but that was not the case. I struggled with having to manage my money, pay bills, car repairs, and being a single parent too. I had to face the fact that she wasn't as supportive or happy for me. When we crossed the state line, I politely told her that we were going to stop by Paul's church since it was on our way home. He was waiting to hear the news of what happened at the event. I believe that it was primarily about how did I do with sales. Again, her eyes got big and the questions started. She wanted to know more about him and details. I was brief, but to the point that we were dating. I expounded about the fact that he was in my life for God's purpose and why I was in his, vice versa. Somehow I knew she did not believe me because she had a smirk on her face. We arrived after church was over, so Paul insisted that we stay and have some dinner at the church. While we were sitting in the multi-purpose center, Christine was expressing to me how Paul was looking at me. She heard another member asking him, when were we going to get married? I ignored the conversation because I already knew it wasn't going to happen. I was hoping that Paul wouldn't say something embarrassing in front of her. She was even more curious about us after meeting him at the 2006 annual expo a month prior, but he seemed to pick up something about her too that wasn't all that good. We made it back to my place safely. I was so glad and wanted to relax and unwind. Christine knew what time it was. As she gathered her belongings, she expressed when she was going to pay me back for the money I paid for her registration fee for the retreat. I agreed that would be fine. I was relieved in realizing that there is some truth. Negative people can bring your spirits down. It doesn't matter who they are or what category they fall into. It can drain you and block your excitement to move forward with your goals and dreams. The more I thought about the recent trip to Wisconsin with Christine, it did not matter if she ever paid me because I was in a good place, mentally and spiritually, and at peace about myself. I've learned that people will come and go as I persevere on the journey. I felt that she did not care about our friendship, and by her vibes and comments, I felt that if I decided not to be bothered by her again, she was fine with it. Therefore, I was willing to let the dust settle and keep focusing on my happiness toward achieving my dreams. The first time that I went to the Ebony Fashion Fair show was with Paul. I have always wanted to attend one of the shows, but this time I finally got the opportunity. The decor was beautifully arranged. As I looked around, people were talking and sitting at different tables. The atmosphere was inviting as I waited patiently to be seated. The music was instrumental with an upbeat jazz kind of rhythmic sound. As I looked to my left, a young boy around 7 years of age approached me. He had on a black tuxedo. He stood by my side and grabbed my hand while I stood there in amazement with a smile on my face. As I began to ask the child who his parents were, he looked at me and smiled as he swung my hand back and forth while chewing gum. When I looked up, Paul was looking at the young boy, trying to figure out what to make of the situation. He asked me if I knew him. I replied no. Suddenly, a woman rushed over to greet us and to tell the little boy to let my hand go, but he wouldn't let go of my hand, so I just stood there. Paul was trying to be polite at that point. He was ready to walk me to our seats. He told the little boy that I was his woman, and he bet that he does not have a Mercedes car And the mother said, "Oh, he has a little Mercedes at home." But at that point, Paul was starting to show that he was irked by all this. Then the little boy let go of my hand. He then followed his mother to their table. According to the seating arrangements, we weren't that far apart from where the little boy was sitting. I wasn't annoyed by his behavior, although the incident was strange. I am friendly toward children, and they seemed drawn to me. But this time I wondered why it happened because I didn't think that there would be any children at the event in the first place. Since having Paul in my life, I had an intuition that I was in training and angels were all around me. I always kept my mind open to meeting new people, the possibilities and new opportunities through various connections. After the show started, there was sheer engagement of everyone's attention as the audience gazed at the runway. The MC for the event had an accent. When she spoke, her words flowed with a melodic rhythm as she presented the models and the clothing that they were wearing. The music was fast-paced and it transitioned according to the apparel that the models were wearing. It was quite fascinating. During intermission, on my way to the restroom, I saw Mrs. Larkin, the family that I met who survived Hurricane Katrina. We chatted on our way back to our seats. She asked me how things were going in my life and updated me on hers. They were seeking people to become a part of their online ministry. It sounded very exciting as she was giving me the details of what they plan to achieve and their mission. She presented the different categories of what area of interest that they were focusing on for the online magazine. However, I felt more compelled to write for the women's column based on my life experiences, but that was taken by her. There were only two categories left, which were the teens and the men, so I accepted the offer to write for the teens. After leaving the event that evening, I went home and prayed about the new opportunity. The following 2 weeks, the Larkins launched their first online Christian ministry magazine, Vision Magazine, in May 2006. As I gained the momentum and faith to move forward in writing for the Larkins ministry, my work was received well. There was positive feedback and exposure that helped me to develop my gift to write in another form. It felt so amazing to see the manifestation of how things work together in our lives as God orchestrates every little detail. During the time Jasmine had confirmed that she heard from God that He called her to preach, I was ecstatic about the news. I knew that God was going to use her in a mighty way. He always knows how to move us along the race. I was honored to attend her initial sermon and watch the glory of God reveal His grace. On May 18, 2006, I received a phone call from Mrs. Rittenhouse to inform me that my disability benefits would be terminated as of June 15, 2006. That was going to be the last payment. I was caught by surprise because she harassed me about finding a job, but I expressed that I was trying and told her about the other medical complications pertaining to my sleeping that I was experiencing. She asked if I have had a sleep study. I replied no, and the fact that no one suggested it. Although I was under my doctor's care, I was never seen by any doctor from CareMed while receiving benefits. I was furious because CareMed disregarded my doctor's prognosis. Again, I prayed to God to work it out and to reveal the next step in His plan. Time was running out, and I still did not have a job. While I learned to wait on God, there was very little that I could do or say other than totally depend on God for being my source. There is a living God that cares about our well-being. When I was faced with financial hardships, little food in my cupboards, not knowing how I was going to pay the rent, $995 a month, and the utilities were past due, I prayed. My friends talked about me, and they made broken promises, and the end result was that they did not help me. When I looked around and evaluated my circumstances, I did not stay stuck on how I am going to make things work, but I continued walking by faith and believing that there was another door waiting to be opened. God kept me through it all. I can witness how He was with me. He made a way out of no way. That is the God I serve. He is all-powerful, all-knowing, and ever-present. The summer was very hot. I think I felt that way because I did not have an air condition in my car. I recall the days when I would arrive at my destination and how my clothing would stick to my skin after profusely perspiring in certain areas on my body. Since I couldn't afford a car with an air condition, I learned how to camouflage what I should wear. It was annoying as I tried to coordinate an all cotton wardrobe and still look professional. Majority of my clothes were rayon, polyester, or stretch material. I would schedule my business appointments early in the morning because I knew at that time the weather was more conducive. I purchased a Honda Accord 1993 for $1,500 the summer of 2004. I was avoiding the responsibility of having a car payment each month. I was wise about having unnecessary debt, but the choice of not having an air conditioned car made me have second thoughts. That was one of my future prayers, to buy a car with air conditioning someday. Thus far, the choice of not having a car payment did allow me the flexibility to financially invest in my business. While surfing the internet for jobs one morning, I checked my email and noticed an email from Mrs. Shout. It was going on 12 months since the last time I had seen her. We met at World USA during the spring of 2005. A year ago, while I was at work, I stopped by the third floor to have some paperwork signed from a manager. I was on my way over to another department on the third floor. While I was walking past Mrs. Shout's cubicle, she turned around to speak and seemed friendly. I introduced myself to her. She confessed that she was a reverend and what her role was in ministry. I noticed that there were some pictures on her desk. I asked her about the photos. She expounded who they were, and then she said that I would be a great woman for her son. I was flattered by her compliment, but I politely declined. She discussed how he had written a book and that she was doing some copyright work on his behalf. I complimented her for believing in her son. She offered to tell me that he was away doing some time at the penitentiary, but he would be out soon. I purposely did not want to discuss that matter with her, but in my mind, I asked God to keep me because I cannot go down another hard road. While reading her email, I was surprised to read about the news that her son's book was published. I also clicked on the link that she sent in the email. I learned that his book was listed as one of the top 20 books to read for the summer in a prestigious celebrity magazine. I was excited to see such progress since the first time she discussed the beginning stages of his work. I quickly responded to her email. We exchanged phone numbers and arranged to get together after she returned from attending a literary event for her son in New York. He was being nominated for an award. I felt that was a huge accomplishment. The way things were happening, I felt that there was a reason for meeting Reverend Shaw. I was hoping that this could be a door to an opportunity to learn more about the book publishing business and an avenue to getting my book published. I still had my guards up after being around many counterfeits. I prayed to God to reveal anything that was not right with my affiliation with Reverend Shaw. The things that I knew about her were obvious. She was an older woman who proclaimed the gospel of Jesus Christ. I had hoped that she was a God-fearing woman. I was aware of many scams and people stealing other people's literary work. Since hearing the recent news that my grandmother had another stroke, I pondered on whether I should go visit her. After sharing my feelings with Paul, he gave me a speech about seeing her and said that this could be the last time. He was very supportive in these kinds of matters. I think that having him in my life reconnected me to my family in spite of how I had changed. It was obviously a sign that God wanted me to visit my grandmother. After Paul was kind enough to pay my way there, I made plans to take the Amtrak to Detroit around the 4th of July. I believe that through my spiritual transition, God was helping me to show love to my grandmother by pressing my way there. She did finish caring for me in my adolescent years. I had struggled for many years hoping that my grandmother would see me for who God made me. I felt that she judged me by the mother I had. My mother was unruly, short-tempered, irresponsible, and mentally ill, and sadly, her life was destructive. It was very difficult to understand these things and what my grandmother felt about my mother when I was a child. But now that I've grown into a woman, and have discovered that my life has some significant purpose for God. I open my heart to let my grandmother know that in person and that God has smiled down upon me. I wanted her to love me as she did with her other grandchildren. At times, Paul could be encouraging and at others pessimistic. He would often ask me how I was going to pay my rent or how I thought about it. I did not panic or lose my composure because I had faith, but I felt more stressful when discussing my financial worries with him because I knew that he wanted me to move in with him. That was something that I never considered doing, no matter how things appeared. Lastly, when I didn't know what to do, I remembered to stand still. I was holding on to my peace because I knew that God was not the author of confusion. Paul was suggesting that I should step up the pace with selling my bookmarks and frames. He would scope out different exhibits in which I could participate as a vendor. He was very good about networking and making that dollar. The more I thought about my circumstances and the cost of the booth, the more I became anxious about it. While I was preparing to leave for Michigan the night before, I wondered if I was making the right decision to take the trip. I had enough concerns to keep my mind occupied, but I knew that I couldn't back out at this point. My ticket was already paid for. The next morning, I felt compelled to check my bank account. While listening to the prompts to hear my recent transactions, the voice automated recorder stated more money than I had expected. I repeated the steps to listen again. The funds in my account were more than I imagined. I was overwhelmed by God's blessings and was extremely grateful. I was able to pay the next month's rent and some bills. My cousin Charlotte sent me an email to express that she enjoyed reading Vision magazine. We continued our dialogue via email. She expressed how much it would mean to her if she could come to visit me. However, I wanted to see her and have a chance to see how much she had matured over the last time we saw each other. I remember when she gave me a letter that she had written a while back. She was expressing how I was her best cousin. I truly didn't know why, because we are 15 years apart in age. A few years ago, she had the opportunity to visit me. I took the time to pick out some nice clothes for her from the Limited Too, because I wanted her to feel special too. I developed a soft spot in my heart for her, and I liked the admiration that she had for me. However, I did not give it much thought this time when she asked to visit. I did not foresee myself going to Michigan anytime soon, but after receiving the recent news about my grandmother, that propelled my desire to take the trip. My stay in Michigan was for a weekend. I was able to visit my grandmother in the hospital. My cousins and aunts and uncles gathered around my grandmother's bed. We individually talked to her, and together we sang some old spiritual hymns. There was nothing more that I could do after seeing her lying there. I did feel that she was alert enough to recognize me. As I prepared to catch the last train back to Chicago that Sunday evening, I did not want to disappoint Charlotte, so I agreed to take her home with me. Her mother was concerned about how Charlotte would get home safe. I promised her that I would bring her back home because she didn't feel safe about Charlotte traveling alone. During the time, it never crossed my mind that having guests would be a distraction while writing my second novel at the time. While riding the train home together, we ate some delicious shrimp and chicken from an Arab fish market in Detroit. The ride was approximately 6 hours. After returning home, I was wondering why I had not heard back from Mrs. Larkin. I submitted my article for Vision magazine before leaving for Michigan. She usually sends an email confirmation, so I decided to send another email to confirm if my article was received. She informed me that there was a new writer for the teens section, along with an apology. I recently had a premonition before I heard the news about the new writer. I believed that my writing was for all people, from all walks of life, but I realized that sometimes we have to start somewhere to get the experience. However, my true goal was to reach the nations and not be confined to one category. I was curious to read what my replacement had to say. While reading the teens article, I could understand why it was a better fit. It was relatable and tangible information to what's happening in our society today. The topics were about today's issues that our teens are facing, for example, gangs, drugs, peer pressure, teen pregnancies, etc. I did not feel surprised when I was bumped to the miscellaneous category. However, my writing style was relating more to the spiritual side of being human. There is the soul, mind, and spirit. The things I wrote about touched the spirit. When we cannot find the answers to our problems through our intellect, we are compelled to pray and seek a higher power for the solution. The articles offered encouragement, enlightenment, and inspiration that comes when we thirst and seek rest from life's issues. Somehow I felt slighted in how the matter was handled. Meanwhile, there was a dispute going on between Paul and Mr. Larkin regarding some upgrades to Paul's computer. Since Mr. Larkin did not complete the job in a timely manner as agreed, Paul became impatient. Things got intense and out of control, and one thing led to another. I felt Paul's frustration and why he was upset. That was his only computer, and he relied on it daily. I felt for something that probably should have taken 10 business days was now going on several weeks. I listened to Paul's complaints and shared my thoughts on the matter. I tried to get him to see that in the beginning, Mr. Larkin wasn't too fond of him when I first met the Larkins. If you know that someone does not have a heart for you and you don't agree on things, why would you do business with them? When I heard the news, I knew it was not a smart move, but I didn't find this out until I returned from Michigan. The weather was beautiful and steamy hot. I made arrangements as planned to have lunch with Reverend Shout after she returned from her visit to New York. I asked Charlotte if she would like to join us. We met Reverend Shout at Benihana's during her lunch hour. While we were laughing and talking, I asked Reverend Shout about the upcoming news on her son's book. She was happy to share how proud she was. I could see it in her eyes. She asked about my book, and I told her that it was not published yet. My thoughts were, maybe this could be the door that God was opening for me. I was hoping that she would connect me directly to her son. Since we both write books, how much of a coincidence could that have been? She responded that I'll let you meet him soon. I replied that would be nice. We concluded our lunch and started walking toward where our cars were parked. Reverend Shout stopped to ask me, would I like to attend a women's event at her church? I replied, yes, that would be nice. At the time, I did not want to exaggerate anything about Reverend Shout, but I started feeling like she was weaving me into her life. She started running down her list of calendar events and how she traveled coordinating church conferences and giving speeches. Suddenly, I had a flashback about the dream that God had shown me how I would be speaking in front of crowds of people one day, and I thought that maybe I could probably attend a conference with her someday. On most days, Charlotte and I sat around talking and watching movies. I introduced her to my world of nature walks around the park, working out, and visiting the library. I explained to her about how my funds were limited before we left Michigan. She seemed content as long as she could talk on her cell phone. I wanted her to have some good memories and fun. Therefore, I paid for her to get her hair done at the beauty shop and took her to the flea market. I was happy when Jasmine invited her to attend an outing at Great America with her family. That same weekend, we attended Paul's church. After church, while we were eating at the multi-purpose center, he suggested that we should go to the beach. It was a beautiful day to enjoy the view of the lake. The weather was around 87 degrees and sunny. He drives very fast. Somehow, it did not bother me while we were riding through some of the country roads. I remember hearing Charlotte singing along in the back seat to a song that was playing on the radio. The louder she sang, Paul decided to turn the station to jazz. She yelled at him to turn it back, but he turned the radio up to drown her out. I felt so embarrassed. Again, he knew how to ruin a good day. Sometimes I just couldn't understand how immature he was at his age. Yet he could be kind one minute and excited to do fun things, and when it doesn't go the way he wants, he acts hyper. As the days went by, there was little time to write in my second book. I lost focus while entertaining and balancing the other daily tasks. But what I feared the most did happen. My writing fell to the bottom of the list. Jacob was away visiting Saul and his brother JR for the summer. I did call often to see how my children were doing. JR was on his summer break from college. He was following his passion and dream to become the next Motown, the agency. Since having a music group of male and female singers, he found an escape to channel his energies and a way to craft his talent. I believe that he is passionate about recording and producing music. His work is very impressive, and someday I believe the world will get a chance to know him. The time was getting close for Charlotte to leave. Her mother sent for her early because she had arranged for her to go school shopping with her father. It was obviously time for me to get back on track from this hiatus to write. It was time to have a serious talk with Charlotte about life. I took both of her hands as I laid them into mine. I prayed for God to protect her and to use her one day for His glory. It was an emotional moment for me because I wished I had someone who cared enough for me to have done the same. But in my heart, I believe there was someone. It was my grandfather. He did pray for me on many days, but I was too young to understand the meaning of such things. This time, JR and Juanita, his girlfriend, rode with me to take Charlotte home. While there, I attended a church in Michigan. I heard a beautiful testimony from a minister that preached the sermon. The words were deposited in my heart. The minister shared how she had gone through a particular trial. She was persecuted like the minister Paul in the Bible. As she shared her testimony, she stated that she had a vision by God before the trial began that she was going to have her own ministry someday. While she was working for a prestigious church, during the time she pondered about the dream and decided to share it with some members. As she grew in faith about the dream, the church accused her of embezzling money or something on the lines of fraud. She was arrested and sent to jail for several months. The incident brought embarrassment to her family, and her integrity was questioned. The press splattered her name in the newspaper, and the news media had their chance too. While in jail, she prayed and had a church experience with fellow mates. The circumstances never stopped her praise. She had to appear before the judge on several occasions before the verdict was reached. On her last court appearance, she prayed for God to move on her behalf, and the judge ruled in her favor. By the time she was set free, her family had lost their home. But through faith, she trusted God and knew that it was an attack by Satan. As she tried to put back together the pieces of her life, she decided to drive to a neighborhood that she dreamt of living. She believed that God could give her a nice home one day. Shortly after stepping out on faith, her family was blessed with a new home and her ministry was forming as she continued to witness to others about her faith. I was in tears after hearing such a powerful testimony. It is true that God keeps His promises. I understand sometimes that before the blessing, there will be storms and testing. But when it's time to receive the blessings, no man can stop God's will. As I continue to believe God for many things in my life, I felt hopeful to hold on to His promises. After returning home, I was ready to get back to writing. I sat down to turn on my computer. While the computer took a few minutes to boot up, I stared at the screen. Then I paused and turned the computer off. The screen went blank like how a light bulb blows. I panicked as I said, "Oh no, Jesus, this cannot be happening." Smoke started coming from my computer. I stepped away from it to see where the smoke was coming from. There was a popping noise and sparks of fire were coming from the back. I unplugged the computer as I cried. I was devastated. I lost 3 weeks of work. I sat there on the floor in a state of disbelief. As a gifted writer through grace, I have to take what I do seriously because I cannot recapture the same words. If I do not record it, the words that come from inspiration may never appear the same as before or return to you. I've learned that inspiration is revealed to you when you're in that divine place to receive it and listen. Since having new distractions in my life, simultaneously things started to happen, one after the other. As I wiped the tears from my eyes, I searched for the last manuscript that I had printed. I had an older version saved on a CD from 3 weeks ago. If I had only clicked the print icon when the thought came to me, I could have had at least a hard copy of the recent work I created. I was consumed with other thoughts and rushing things. I ignored the premonition that I had before leaving for Michigan. I did not take the time to listen and believe it. I sense now that's why creative work is valued by people who have been prosperous from it and wise enough to record every little detail as it is given to them from heaven. I believe that some of the distractions were designed to sabotage my blessings and to distract my focus from writing A Passion of Thorns because I wasn't aware of how valuable this assignment would someday become. During the time Paul was planning his annual family and friends picnic, it was a year ago around Labor Day weekend when I attended the picnic. The picnic was held at his home in the backyard. There were tents placed in the yard along with a few picnic tables, chairs, balloons, and a jungle gym. The barbecue was good and there was plenty of food to go around. The music that was playing brought back memories during the times when I was growing up as a teenager. The yard was filled with guests as they brought their children to come out and play. The festivities set the atmosphere where the children enjoyed playing in the jungle gym as they ran around screaming and laughing with each other. It was an all-day event for everyone to mingle and enjoy the weather that day. As it started to get dark, it was time for the children to separate from the adults. Some parents took their children home, and the children that were left went inside. Paul arranged for the children to watch a movie video for the remainder of the evening. It was time for the adults to enjoy the entertainment that was planned for the evening. There was a hostess that came out to host an adult toy party. I wasn't sure about what it entailed, but I had a clue. I was never fond of the toy party, and when I expressed my opinion about it, Paul was still adamant about having one this year. However, this time I felt that it was giving mixed messages about his position as a minister. My feelings were strong about it. There was a big difference in our morals and values. I realized that this was the line that separated us. I was not willing to compromise supporting his hobby, but it was a big deal to him. He did not care about his reputation that he had recently become an ordained minister. I wondered why I cared so much. Some of the same people that attended the barbecue also attended his trial sermon, but no one dared to say anything to him about the toy party. They did the polite thing to leave early that evening. Since I didn't exhibit that I was having a good time anymore, he got smart with me and told me that I could go home. I was used to his smart remarks, but this time my feelings were really hurt. I decided to go inside the house because I was feeling puzzled about the matter. I sat on the couch and turned on the TV. The way I felt, I could no longer ignore it. I was torn because I had grown to have feelings and deeply cared for him, but I fought hard not to fall in love with him because I knew we weren't spiritually equally yoked. I could tell that his family was feeling uncomfortable as well about the toy party. They were kind people, and we connected through sharing our faith in Christ. I felt out of place when they decided to leave. I gathered my things together and told him that I was leaving. He walked me to my car while apologizing and asked me to stay, but I replied that I thought it was best for me to leave. He exhibited frustration when I told him to have fun and to enjoy himself. While driving home that evening, I turned on a CD player to listen to some gospel music. I asked the Lord why He allowed this kind of man to come into my life. We have so many differences and things just aren't making any sense. As soon as I made it home, Paul called. He said that he shut the party down right after I left, and he wanted to talk. I was frank with him by asking him which side of the fence was he on, God or Satan's. I felt if he was a true minister, then there should be some godly fruit exhibiting a change. I made it clear to him that I no longer desired to walk with him on his journey. That was my stance, and this time I didn't compromise. The conversation went on for about an hour. We knew that we were on two different pages and at different places mentally and spiritually. I did not bicker or stress the point. I politely told him that he must find his way when he is truly ready. I believed that his feelings were hurt. He came over to my house because he wanted to work on our differences. While he was over, he received a call about his father had passed away that morning. He got quiet as he sat still. I was concerned about how he was going to get through it. I had sympathy for him. Therefore, I extended my hand. I had met his father a year ago While attending another funeral with him of a loved one of his, he asked me if I would attend the funeral. I replied yes. I didn't want to bail out on him after hearing about his loss. I didn't have much to offer besides my bookmarks. I dedicated a poem that I had written to his siblings in honor of his father and framed it and gave it to his sister. After attending the funeral and repast, I continued to call Paul a few more times to check on him. As a friend, I needed to start exhibiting that to him. I avoided talking about us getting back together. He was hoping that we would and was willing to do things differently. But somewhere along the journey, the flame went out. The more I suppressed my true feelings about the things that I didn't feel was right, I started to lose myself. I felt less empowered as I began to feel weighed down by fetters of bondage. One morning I woke while staring at the ceiling, and before I could get out of bed, I felt a weight being lifted. I pondered and immediately thought about Paul, and that's when I knew it was time to walk away. The writing was on the wall. I prayed the whole time to God to order my steps. I wanted to be happy and free again. I believed that it was God that freed me. My season with Paul was over as far as occupying a space in my life. I no longer needed to feel bound or fear of failing the test anymore.